Yeah, I've got some levels.
Oh,
yeah.
I've got not much volume on my headphones, Andy.
Yeah, that's full up. How's that?
1, 2. That's a lot better, thank you. Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Am I okay, or am I a bit screamy?
No, that's okay at the moment.
Is that all right? Is it?
Yeah.
Because I do tend to get a bit loud, apparently.
Get excited, don't you?
I get a little bit excitable. Yeah. I'll have a quick slurp before we start.
Right.
Lovely.
So how are you going to lead out of the interview? Are you going to Sarah playing a track?
What are we going to play? Maypole.
Maypole. Yeah.
Yeah.
And will that be the end of the interview, or are you coming back for another chat?
I would probably only do it in. I think about. If we work to about 7 or 8 minutes for the interview.
Yeah.
And then about 2 or 3 minutes. How long's the track? It's quite a long track, isn't it?
It's
about 5 minutes near enough, isn't it?
Yeah.
So unless you. I seem to remember about 5 minutes last
night. Played it out during the instrumental, because the last verse is the same as the second verse anyway. So.
Okay. 4 minutes 57.
Oh, cool. That's a good guess, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Done your homework?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, if we perhaps get Steve to introduce that.
Yeah.
It'd be good, wouldn't it?
Okay.
And then just come out of it that way. So hopefully you won't have to do too much chopping.
Probably not much at all.
Keep our fingers crossed, shall we?
Yeah.
Right, tell me when you're rocking and rolling.
Yeah, it's rolling.
Proudly serving the people of Northampton. We love being local. 106.9 NNBC.
Now, one of the really good things about working here at 106.9 NNBC here in Northampton is that you get to speak to lots of local, interesting people. And I managed yesterday to speak to Steve Giles. He's from a band based in Northampton called Dark. And they have, they released back in the early 1970s an album which has now become one of the world's most rare and sought-after albums. Tell you what I'll do, I'll let Steve take up the story.
Yeah, I was still at school at Trinity High School, and I had a guitar and obviously started playing it, and a friend of mine also had a guitar, so we started playing together, and then I decided I would like to form a band. Initial inspiration for playing the guitar was seeing the Young Ones at the cinema in about 1962 with Cliff Richard and the Shadows, and once I saw Hank Marvin on stage with his Burns guitar, I knew that was what I wanted to do. So.
Would this have been at the old ABC cinema there in Northampton?
To be honest, I can't remember which one it was. No, it was so long ago. I was only about 9 then, I suppose, but it probably was the ABC, yeah. But once I'd seen Hank Marvin and his Burns guitar on stage, that was it. Something lit up in my brain, and I knew that was what I wanted to do. I got my first guitar for Christmas in 1965, and that was a Spanish-style acoustic guitar. But I didn't really... I played it okay, but having quite small hands for a guitarist, I struggled with the wider fretboard that the Spanish acoustic styles have. So I pestered Mum and Dad, and eventually they relented and got me an electric guitar in October of '66, and that's when I started. And then once I discovered bands like Cream and Hendrix, I knew I wanted to play lead guitar and I wanted to form a band. So Bruce and I got together and roped in Bruce was the bass player, the friend that I had. He went on to bass because he was mad keen on Jack Bruce of Cream, so that was quite handy, the fact he was happy to play bass guitar. We roped in another friend, Charlie Hyams, on drums, and we started off as a three-piece for about a year or so. As I say, while still at school, and then in about 1969 sometime we came across a keyboard player, Martin Maloney, and he joined us for a while. And eventually I think it was Bruce who first left, so I found another bass player, Carl Bush. He joined us in about 1970, so we were still a four-piece then. And then sometime in 1971, the drummer Charlie left, and Clive, who was still the present drummer, he joined us. And I was very pleased with that because I'd seen him in a few local bands. He was very young, he's 2 years younger than I was, but I was very impressed with him. And when he actually applied for the position as drummer for Dark, I was absolutely over the moon. Unfortunately, he decided to join, and that was great.
So I take it at that stage then you were just doing sort of local gigs, were you?
Yeah, we tended to arrange our own, mainly in church halls or that sort of thing. We didn't really use an agency or anything like that. just as I say, a case of finding an available church hall and arranging the gig, and then putting the word out to around all our friends and their friends to get a crowd together. And we eventually gathered quite a huge local following who used to come around to gig after gig, just to see us play.
And most of the material, it was your own material. You didn't do covers and things like that.
Well, we did the occasional cover, the occasional Cream cover or Hendrix cover, but most of them were our own compositions. When Bruce was in the band, he wrote quite a few, and then I wrote a few, and then as Bruce left, I carried on writing, and we didn't really carry many of Bruce's songs over to the new band, so it was mainly my compositions, and to say, plus a few covers here and there.
So then Dark was officially formed, and it was sort of how did things develop from there then for you?
We got to about 1971, as I said, and we were a four-piece with Clive on drums, Carl on bass, Martin Maloney, that is, on keyboards. Then Martin left, so we went back to a three-piece again. And then halfway through 1971, Carl decided he'd had enough, so he left, and I put another ad in the Chronicle and Echo for a bass player. Must be able to improvise, apparently, I said in the advert, and Ron saw this, fortunately for me, and he came along with two of his friends, Kenny, his cousin, and Mark Parrish, who became our roadies. And they came along to the cellar under my dad's photographic shop where we rehearsed all the time. And I remember Ron sitting in the chair, and I said, "OK, Ron, we're going to go through this number, Maypole. And all you got to do is play D, because it's in the key of D, and it just starts off like bum, 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 just the D note." So he did that, and then after a couple of bars, he started moving around a bit with his fingers, and I thought, wow, this is great. And it really sounded good. The very first time we played it, it was like we'd been playing it for years as a three-piece, and obviously Clive knew the song anyway, so there's the two of us playing it, and Ron was just jamming away into it as though he'd played it all his life, and I knew in that instant we'd got something special going. All I needed was for Ron to say he'd be happy to join the band, and fortunately he did.
So how did those early days sort of develop? And I know eventually you released an album. How did all of that work out for you?
Well, it was the recording the album really was because I could see we knew we were good. We played well, we enjoyed playing, and we knew we were a good band, but we didn't seem to be getting the recognition we were seeking. So I was worried that we were going to split them and I'd have nothing to show for it. So I decided that, having been to SIS Studios in Military Road a few times with early incarnations of Dark, I thought it'd be nice to get this current band into a studio so that we got something down that I could look back on in the future and remember all the it was good days. So that's the reason I wanted to make the album. And about 9 weeks before that, I can't remember how we got the gig now, but we got a gig at the Rock Club in Rock Street in Wellingborough supporting Status Quo.
Right, that's superb, isn't it?
So that was a great evening. There's another side story attached to that, but I won't get into that at the moment unless you want me to. But in the audience that night was a friend of Clive's, Martin Weaver, who was also a very good local guitarist, who was in a band, either in a band at the time or just left a band, his own band called Wicked Lady. And knowing that he was available, I think Clive probably talked to him, "Do you fancy joining us? We're going to record an album, be nice if you could join us for that." So he said, "Yeah, why not?" So he came along, and just a few weeks before we recorded the album, and started to rehearse the numbers with us so that we could actually do the album as a four-piece.
So did it cost a lot of money then to take all this into the recording studio?
Well, I worked it out once how much it actually cost me for the sessions, and all the costs involved in producing the album, and I think it was £87.17.5p.
Right.
If I remember rightly.
You all put in a hat, did you?
And I paid for it all myself.
Oh, right,
yeah,
okay.
I must have been saving for quite some time to do that. Mind you, that cost doesn't include what I paid myself in producing the actual photographs, because the photographs that I stuck on the sleeves, because the sleeves were all handmade, I made them all myself, so they've got photographs stuck in as opposed to being printed sleeves. So that was additional cost which I paid for myself.
And in those days, of course, it would have been a lot of money, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, I'll have to sit back sometime and work out what that would be equivalent to these days, but I've not done it recently, so...
So the CD was... Oh, sorry, not the CD. The vinyl was... Yeah. The album was released.
Yeah.
How many copies did you...
Well, originally I was going to have 20 done, because remember, I was financing this, so I had to be careful how much I could afford. I initially said, well, I'll have 20 done, and then we asked around who would be wanting one, and I soon realised that 20 wasn't going to be enough. enough. So I upped it to 30, so we got the 30 done. But before they pressed the 30, they sent us 2 test pressings, which had the proper labels on. So actually, we got 32. And then the word got around and people had started hearing it, and then a lot of other people said, we'd like one of those as well, can you get any more done? So not being able to afford too much more, I asked them to pay something up front for the pre-order, and I was able to finance then a second run of 30 plus 2 test pressings. So that is all that was ever produced for the original album, 2 runs of 32 making 64, that's all. But the strange thing about it, and one of the reasons that it's made it so valuable and sought after now, is they weren't a one-off. There was different versions of the sleeve. There was gatefold sleeves, or my version of a gatefold sleeve, and single sleeves, and colour sleeves, and black and white sleeves.
And I suppose this was because you'd done them all yourself,
yeah,
so you couldn't get that uniformity, could you?
Well, I couldn't afford to do them all colour gatefold, because the photographic paper was very expensive in those days. And as I said, I was paying for it myself out my own money, only earning £6 a week in those days, so it's difficult to amass enough money to do it properly.
Well, we said about the rarity and how things have developed. Tell us, I mean, it is an incredible story that this has spread over to, I think, is it the United States?
Oh, it's worldwide now, the recognition, of it.
Fill us in on what happened then after the production of that album.
Well, we had these done, we kept a few, we gave a few, we sold a few, and some went down to record labels in the vain attempt to see if anybody would be interested in signing us up. But the only one nibble we had was from Island Records, who said, it sounds all right, we'll pay you £30 a week, and if you can set up a gig, we'll send an A&R man along to come and have a look at you and have a listen. So we set a gig up on 1st of December 1973 at the Bowton College of Further Education, and it was a great night. The students loved it, but the A&R man never turned up, so it never went any further.
It wasn't to be.
No, but a few of these records were left lying around in record offices, and eventually one of them turned up in a second-hand shop in London, and there's some American collector was in London and happened to be going through, as they do, all these records, see if there's anything worthwhile, and he came across this album of ours. I didn't know whether it was a black and white or colour one, I've no idea, but he was intrigued by that, so he bought it and took it away and played it and was absolutely bowled over by it. So he made a few cassette copies and sent them around to all his friends, and they said, we need to find these people and see if we can do a deal with them. So they eventually, I think the way they found us was literally, they got the names on the album, so they just literally rang through all the Gileses and all the Johnsons and all the Weavers in the phone book they could find until they stumbled across the right one. And they eventually found us and said, your record is going to be very valuable, we'd like to do a repressing of it. So they paid for me to, I think they originally asked for me to send the master tapes over, which I had possession of, fortunately, but no way was I going to send them over to America. So I said, well, I'll get them pressed here and then I'll ship the records over to you. So that's what we did.
And what's the value of the album then? What did it eventually get up to?
Well, the original album?
Yeah.
Well, it's risen gradually from a few £100 right through the thousands, £10,000, and just earlier this month, one of the original colour gatefolds was sold, having been found last November by a record store in Kenilworth. It was sold to I think a guy lives in London, I'm not sure. Anyway, they were desperate to keep it in the UK, and they were getting offers from all over the world approaching £30,000.
That's
but this guy said, well, look, I want it, I'll give you £25,000 now if I can take it away with me. And they said, okay, we want it to stay in the UK. So they did a deal there and then, and it's now sold for £25,000.
And that's purely because of the rarity of it and the fact that it's sort of got around the world, and
it's
people like the sound.
The reason that copy sold for that much is because as you say, it's so rare anyway, but that was one of the only 12 colour gatefolds in existence, and it's been looked after. It was virtually immaculate. The only sign of aging that I could see, really, I went to have a look at it before it was sold, was the slight bit of fading in the colour photographs. Right. Other than that, the vinyl was in immaculate condition. The little booklet, which I did, a little lyric booklet, which I made for each album, included in the sleeve, that hardly looked as though it'd even been leafed through at all.
And I guess they were unique as well, weren't they?
Oh, yeah.
Because you'd done it by hand yourself.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I've heard stories that just the booklet themselves are sold for £900 to £1,000 without the sleeve or the record.
Astonishing.
I know, it's amazing.
Absolutely. And you've released or you've produced another album, I know, in the 1990s.
Mid-90s, yeah. Well, we'd done a few deals with various people to license the rights to Dark Round the Edges, for them to produce it in another vinyl version, in CD versions. So we had amassed quite a tidy sum from doing that. So we thought, well, the best thing to do with this money is to actually get back into the studio and record another album. So we wrote some new songs and brought some songs back from the early 70s with us, and recorded 9 tracks onto this album. We called that Anonymous Days.
And that was from 1996. In 30 years' time, then you could be repeating the exercise.
Well, possibly, yeah. I mean, it's just actually that album is just about to be released by an American label on vinyl.
Right.
So you never know. You never know. I mean, there's going to be slightly more copies of it available than the original 64 that I did. I think they're releasing a 500 initially. But yeah, as you say, you never know. The only unfortunate thing about the vinyl is that the CD we made is 54 minutes long, and it's a tad too long, really, for our style of music. For an LP, you'd lose bass response, so we've had to drop one of the tracks, unfortunately. But if it succeeds, this LP release, they may well release it on CD as well, so we can get that track back.
Well, let's go back to the album then, Dark Round the Edges. Steve, I'll let you introduce the track that we're going to play.
Okay, yeah. Well, I actually mentioned this earlier in an interview. It's the probably one of my very first compositions, and it's the very first one that Ron played when he attended the audition for the bass player. And it's got a bit of a story about the way I wrote this. The way I wrote songs in those days was just to play about on the guitar until something clicked, and then that was a nice chord sequence. So I worked out a melody for that, and the very last thing I ever did was write the lyrics. So I'd got this melody and this chord sequence. I just wrote down some words that I could sing to it as I progressed the song. And the first line is, the elephants were dancing around a maypole and a tree. I've no idea where those words came from, and I fully intended to change them, but I never did get around to changing them, so that's where they remain. But that is where I got the title for this song from, and it is called Maypole.
Bit of prog rock for you then on a Wednesday afternoon. Really good to speak to Steve Giles from the local band Dark. We did that yesterday afternoon. Actually, it was a nice, good chat about the music and the fantastic story about the album Dark Round the Edges. And from that album, we heard, of course, that track Maypole. NNBC 106.9. Producer Andy Johnson and Mark Simons with you through until 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Proudly serving the people of Northampton. We love being local. 106.9 NNBC.
Great. Yeah, we've got about...
Can you edit that in 50 minutes?
I can have a go. We have got about 16 minutes, I think.
There's a lot there, isn't there?
Yeah, but it's such a fascinating story.
It is, it's astonishing.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. Yeah,
Well,
it is, it's astonishing
It
story.
will go out in one way or another. I don't know if it'll be today, but it will go out several times.
Oh, well, if you give me a clue when it's going to be
Yeah.
on, I'll record it and I'll edit obviously what I've done and
Yeah.
put it together.
Yeah. Normally we're told to keep interviews, are we, to about 7-8 minutes?
Yeah,
total,
I'm not very
so-
good at that. The trouble is, if I find people interesting,
Yeah.
I don't want to be looking
No,
at
you don't want to
them.
be. We would have cut you short then when you were talking about Ron joining the band. Probably.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
We haven't got started then. So,
Yeah, that's fine.
okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Let me save that before
So how long is that you say?
well, I
Oh, you got that bit at the end to...
bit at the end
Chop
to
and change
chop
it,
and
yeah.
a bit at the start because I'd left it running while you were generally having a chat, so I could adjust.
Oh, right.
levels. So that needs to come out, but I'll save it all unedited.
So when you say it'll go out several times, it'll go out on the days?
Yeah.
Yeah, fine. If it's
Yeah.
give me some idea when.
We-
And so I mentioned it to a few people. So, can we hear that? So I said, well, I don't know when it's going out, but
Right, let's save it.
Absolutely
Let's
amazing.
save it.
And I bet you didn't even consider it, did you, at the time?
well, we probably made a joke. I wouldn't be too surprised if we joke. This is going to be worth a fortune someday. And laughed at it.
But not seriously.
No, not at all. No. I said, well, that's not the reason I made it. It was just so I got something to keep. I never thought for 1 minute any of this would happen. Never occurred to me in a million years.
It's great, isn't it? Great story.
But that's how these things happen, isn't it? You could never
No.
engineer something like this at all.
You went on Anglia TV as well, didn't you? At the time?
Yeah, yeah,
About
it was
20
a-
years ago.
yeah.
And,
That was about the time of Anonymous Day. Well, just after we'd done Anonymous Days.
So that's
before we did
96,
the
Yeah.
beer festival just over the road there. So that probably would have been 97 when we did that interview.
Right. Yeah, God.
Oh,
Right,
oh,
pack
cool, we're
this
still
stuff up.
filming, aren't we? I forgot about
Yes,
I
it will
forgot about the
it'll all be on there.
Yeah, same, isn't he? God. You don't do films, Andy, do you?
Well, I don't
Didn't realise you were a film star.
I've forgotten about that. I could have been picking your nose or something. But even I got to play with the legendary Dark, and I'm really chuffed about it.
Oh yeah, I
should have mentioned-
I think
it's got round to
mentioning that.
No,
We
that's
have a
fine.
very important person in the studio here, rhythm guitarist.
No, a very, very minor part, but so glad to be involved. It is,